Boldwood presents The Carmarthen Murders, written by John Nicholl and read by Jake Urry. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. 1. Emma didn't know how long she hid in the large Victorian wardrobe to the side of her single bed. She didn't know how long he appeared between the two heavy oak doors and watched as she slowly drifted into fitful sleep. She didn't know what time he pushed the doors open and crept towards her in the darkness of the night. But he did. She knew that he did. Emma woke with a start, telling herself that the dark silhouette slowly approaching her was the nightmare construct of her subconscious mind. But she froze, statue-like, as the inky shadow took on an obvious human form that suddenly gained pace and loomed over her. And then a hand, a large, hot, clammy hand, pulled the bedclothes over her head, clamped her mouth tight shut, and silenced her scream before it materialized. A myriad unwelcome thoughts invaded her mind as he pinned her head to the pillow and raised his free arm high above his head before forming his hand into a weapon and bringing it crashing down, again and again, rendering her unconscious and bleeding. Emma didn't know how long she remained senseless, or what he did to her while she slept. She didn't know what time he lifted her from her bed and carried her down the staircase and out into the Welsh city street. But he did. She knew that he did. When she first awoke from her enforced slumber, Emma thought, for one glorious but all too fleeting moment, that the events of the previous night were just a nightmare. But the throbbing pain seemingly erupting from every inch of her face and the congealed blood around her nose and mouth brought reality into sharp focus. The bed was too soft, the quilt too heavy, the room too warm, the total absence of light alien to her experience, and terrifying, totally terrifying. She wasn't in her familiar surroundings. Oh, God, it was real. It was all too real. Where was she? Oh, God, what to do? Should she shout out? Should she scream? Should she yell for help and continue shouting louder and louder until someone responded to her plight? Surely she should call for help. But no, hold on a second. What if he was there somewhere and hidden by the darkness? What if he was listening and ready to feed on her fear? What if he was poised, ready to attack and silence her as soon as she uttered the slightest sound? Come on, Emma, do something. Don't just lie still, girl. You have to do something. She ran her hands over her body and realized that she was naked as she eased back the quilt, sat upright, and climbed off the bed with both her hands held out in front of her. Keep me safe, God. I'll be a good girl, a really good girl. Please keep me safe. Emma felt her heart pounding in her throat as she took her first tentative step forwards in the gloom, then another, willing herself onwards, 4 steps, 5 steps, 6, until her throbbing fingers found a wall only seconds later. That's it, Emma, that's it. Find a switch. You can do it, girl. Find a switch. There had to be a light switch somewhere. She sucked repeated gulps of fetid air deep into her lungs as she ran the palms of both hands over every inch of the wall, in every conceivable direction. But she didn't find anything of note. Don't give up, Emma. You've got all your life to live. You can do it, girl. Please don't give up. It was much too soon for that. She allowed the wall to support her slight 9.5 stone frame for a second or two before counting to 3 inside her head and forcing herself to move slowly to her right in a sideways motion, all the time keeping contact with the wall. But she found nothing except for what felt like a large picture frame secured to its surface. Was she in a house? It seemed she was in a house. That had to be a good thing, didn't it? Surely it was a good thing. Yes, of course it was. If it was a house, there must be doors, there must be windows, there may be neighbors. There was a way out of there. She could feel the warm red blood surging through her veins and arteries. She was alive. There was hope. There was always hope. Keep moving, Emma. Be brave, girl. There just had to be a way out of there. She transferred her hands to the second wall. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4. Another picture frame, yet another frame, and then a door. Yes. It had to be a door. Come on, Emma. You can do it, girl. She'd be out of there before she knew it, wouldn't she? Adrenaline surged through her bloodstream as her hope of escape leapt and danced in her mind and left her giddy. But her newfound euphoria didn't last. The surface of the door was cold, not icy cold, but colder than the wall. It was metal. Oh, God, it was metal. What other explanation was there? Emma reached up and clawed at the metal surface until her painted nails were broken and her fingertips bled. There was no handle, no way of opening it, just a vent or serving hatch at the center point of the door, at eye level. She slumped on the floor. Oh, God, that wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. Suddenly, a bright white light flooded the room and temporarily blinded her as she lowered her head and hugged her knees to her chest. At first, as she looked up and her sight gradually adjusted to the extreme brightness, the room's comfortably furnished appearance reassured her in some strange way, as if the bohemian decor somehow introduced a degree of normality to an outlandish situation. But all too soon, as she slowly swiveled her aching head, taking it all in for the first time, she gasped and spluttered for oxygen. There were no windows, just 4 walls covered from floor to ceiling with red and gold flock wallpaper, adorned with large black and white portraits of individual girls of about her age in various states of undress, and a glass door in the rear wall to the side of the bed, through which she could see a white porcelain toilet. Emma sat upright, shielding her face with one hand, and studied each of the photographs in turn. There were 5 in total. 5 grinning, pouting girls, who she observed had an unmistakable air of sadness about them, despite their lipstick smiles. All the girls were white, young and slim, and had shoulder-length blonde hair, cut in a similar style. Just like her. They all... Emma winced. Where on earth were those girls now? Would hers be the 6th portrait hanging on the wall? Don't think it, Emma. Just don't think it and hope for the best. As she folded her arms in an attempt to mask her nakedness, a sudden electric hum filled the space with sound. Emma slowly raised her head and saw a wall-mounted video camera located high in one corner of the room, directly opposite the bed. The camera buzzed and swiveled slightly as she moved, focused on her and only on her. She couldn't actually see the shadow man of her waking nightmare, but she was certain he was watching her every move. As she sat there with her mind racing, a disembodied male voice emanated from 2 speakers fixed in the ceiling at opposite ends of the room, and made her flinch. "Welcome to your new home, my lovely. I hope you find the accommodation satisfactory." She parted her lips as if to speak, but then closed her mouth when she couldn't find the words. "I will refer to you as Venus 6 during your stay. I hope that won't be too much of an inconvenience." She looked up and focused on the camera, despite the glare of the spotlights. She wanted him to see her as a real person, an individual with a personality, hopes and dreams. A girl with thoughts, feelings, and a life to live in that big wide world beyond the room. "My name's Emma. I'm a student at the university. I'm in my 2nd year. I'm studying to be a psych—" The room was returned to darkness at the flick of an unseen switch, and was instantly filled with the noise of female whimpers that gradually evolved into ear-piercing screams that got louder and louder, causing her to clutch at both sides of her head and cover her ears. She lifted herself onto all 4s, crawled forwards, and threw up against the wall in a corner of the room. After what seemed like an age, but in reality was no more than 2 minutes, silence prevailed, and the light dazzled her for a second time. "Emma is dead and buried, my lovely. She's gone. She no longer exists. Your name is Venus 6, although I'll just call you Venus for the sake of convenience. I hope that's clear enough. It would not be a good idea to displease me again. Others have made the same mistake." She sat there in silence, not knowing what to do or say. "What's your name, my lovely?" Emma looked directly at the camera lens and forced a less than plausible smile. It seemed sensible to cooperate, sensible to appease him in any way she could. Maybe, if he liked her, he wouldn't hurt her again. Maybe he'd let her go. Maybe if— "I'm waiting for an answer. Disappoint me 1 too many times, and the last sound you hear will be your own screams." She swallowed hard as violent images played behind her eyes. "Venus! My name's Venus!" "What was that? What did you say? You appeared to be choking on your words. I wouldn't go giving me any ideas if I were you. Strangulation isn't a pleasant way to die. The victim's eyes bulge and dim as their life force drains away." She repeated her allocated name, louder this time, and hated herself for it. But she had to buy time. That's what she told herself. She had to survive. "You will call me Master during your stay. You'll use the term each and every time you address me. You will never forget to use it. No other term is acceptable. Respect is everything in my eyes. It would be in your interests to remember that." She nodded once, searching her mind. Did she recognize his voice? That erudite, soft Welsh accent was somehow familiar to her. Surely she'd heard it somewhere before. But where? Think, Emma, think. Perhaps if she could just call him by name, it may help. Or was that a stupid idea? Yes, it was probably a stupid idea. "I suggest you respond, unless you want to live out the remainder of your miserable existence in perpetual darkness. I can arrange that for you if you like. It would be a minor temporary inconvenience to me, but nothing more." She shook her head and squirmed as her injuries screamed for attention. "No, please no, I'm begging you. I really wouldn't want that." "Oh, really? If you're sure. I can play the recording again if you'd like to hear it. I rather enjoy the vivid memories it engenders." It's music to my ears, a melody that I've come to love. One of my previous guests endured it for nearly 3 days before finally charging the wall and smashing her skull. Picture it in your mind's eye as I am. It was rather impressive in a pathetic sort of way. Give me a second, I'll just check my notes. Ah, yes, it was Venus 4. I was fortunate enough to catch her entire performance on film. I'll show it to you one fine day. I'm sure you'd find it interesting." Emma jerked her head back and raised a hand to her face. "Was that a no?" She nodded and wiped away her tears with the back of one hand. "You're certain? I can give you more time to think, if that helps." "No, 1,000 times no." "Then I suggest you say it again, but with the appropriate degree of veneration and devotion. Come on, I'm listening." Was he laughing? Was that muffled laughter? Yes, it had to be laughter. The vicious, demented bastard was laughing at her. "Please don't play it again, master." There was the sound of clapping. "Now that was much better. Give yourself a pat on the back." She reached behind her and followed his instructions. "That's it, Venus. Pat away, my lovely. Pat away. You're a fast learner. That's to your credit. It may save your life one day. Now, is there anything I can do to make your stay more comfortable?" Emma screwed up her face. Should she plead for her freedom? Should she throw herself at his mercy? No, it was too soon, far too soon. "I'd like my clothes, please, master." A reasonable request. Surely it wasn't too much to ask. She flinched as he dissolved into a fit of giggles that both angered and unnerved her. "You bled rather badly on your journey here, my lovely. Head wounds tend to flow red and create quite a mess in the process. Your clothes were soiled and have been discarded accordingly. A regrettable inconvenience, I'm afraid, but such is life. I feel sure you'll understand and forgive me in the circumstances." Emma sighed deeply as a bead of sweat ran down her forehead and found a home on her bare chest. "You've no objection? Can I take that as read?" She wanted to scream. She wanted to yell and cry like a spoiled child. But instead she said, "I have no objections, master." "Then I suggest we start as we mean to go on. I think it's best if you take a hot shower and attend to that pretty yellow hair of yours. Do it now, please. Come on, straight away. No delays. It's important to look your best. If your outward appearance is pleasing to me, I may be less inclined to cut you open and enjoy the internal view." She nodded, but didn't speak. The man was insane, completely insane. "I require an answer, Venus. Silence is not an option if you wish to survive for very long in this new world of yours." She looked directly at the camera again and spoke through her tears. "I understand, master." That's what the bastard wanted. She felt certain of it. Her total subservience. She had to play his games. "You'll no doubt be pleased to hear that I've left some suitable clothing in the bathroom for you, you lucky girl. Now would be an opportune time to indicate your appreciation. I'm a great admirer of good manners." She pressed her lips together. Perhaps if she said the right things, she'd get out of there in one piece. "Thank you." "Thank you what? Thank you what?" There was a steely edge to his voice this time. Thank you, master. The words stuck in her throat. Again. Thank you, master. And again. Thank you, master. Shout it out. Announce it to the world. Shout it, Venus. Shout it at the very top of your voice. Thank you, master. Thank you, master. Louder. She was yelling now, repeating the phrase again and again, like a crazed Eastern mantra. You can stop now. He remained silent for about 30 seconds before speaking again. Well, I have to acknowledge that your performance was rather impressive, Venus. Not all my previous guests were nearly so compliant or enthusiastic. Based on my early impressions, I'm inclined to keep you. I do like an intelligent subject. You'll no doubt be glad to hear that they tend to live longer than the more limited creatures I've entertained over the years. I'm easily bored, you see. And who can blame me, eh? I'm sure you wouldn't be critical, what with... She dropped her head and wept as a trickle of yellow urine ran down her left leg and soaked the carpet. Oh dear, is the pressure getting to you, my lovely? What a sad sight to see. She didn't respond. Perhaps silence was best. What could one say in light of such irrational cruelty? Perhaps if she stilled herself, she'd become less visible. No, that made no sense. And don't go thinking that anyone else may have heard your animalistic howling. It wouldn't do to get your hopes up unnecessarily. You can yell away to your heart's content. Don't hold yourself back on my account. Your room is suitably soundproofed to the highest possible standards. It was installed by experts some years back on the pretext of being a recording studio. It proved rather costly, but was well worth every penny spent. I've had a great deal of fun as a result of their efforts. I think you'll find they did an excellent job. There's no one listening but me. I didn't think there was. Oh dear, now you appear to have soiled yourself. Perhaps now would be an opportune time to take that hot shower I mentioned. You can clean up that mess before bedtime. I had the foresight to fit a stain-resistant floor covering. It seemed advisable in the circumstances, wouldn't you agree? She forced a quickly vanishing smile and nodded. Perhaps if he grew to like her, he'd be kinder. Perhaps he'd leave the light on rather than return the room to darkness. Perhaps if she followed his instructions to the letter, he'd eventually let her go. Or was she deluding herself? Emma stood and rushed towards the glass door, acutely aware of her nakedness and the pervasive smell of excrement. But there was a second video camera in the white-tiled bathroom, and she realized any hope of privacy was lost to her. Emma faced away from the camera and hurriedly washed herself as the hot water warmed her skin, and then that same voice filled the room and left her trembling. Now would be a good time to dry yourself, attend to your hair, and put on the makeup, clothing, and shoes I've left for you in the cupboard directly below the sink. Take your time and make yourself beautiful for me, Venus. I may pay you a visit in an hour or two. He laughed. Honor and obey, till death us do part. I feel sure you can see where I'm going with this. Emma didn't move. Well, get on with it, my lovely. I'm fast losing patience, and that's never a good thing. She sucked in the air in an attempt to silence her pounding heart before stepping out of the cubicle, right foot first, and taking a bath towel from the heated towel rail. She wrapped it around herself before peering into the wall-mounted mirror secured to the tiled enclave above the sink. Emma's mouth fell open as she witnessed the extent of her wounds. Her once pretty face resembled a grotesque Halloween mask, with congealed blood still smeared around her swollen lips despite her shower, and a fractured, misshapen nose. Her brow furrowed as she rested her forehead against the glass. What had he done to her? What on earth had he done to her poor face? Deep breaths, Emma, deep breaths. Hold it together, girl. No need to panic. What would that achieve? Nothing, nothing at all. She stood there, staring into the mirror for a few seconds more, contemplating her new reality, before ensuring the towel was secure and bending at the knees to open the cupboard with trembling fingers. She was glad of the opportunity to get dressed, glad of the chance to recover her dignity to some degree despite her circumstances. It seemed a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. One small step in the right direction. One small step towards normality and potential freedom. That's what she told herself. That's what she yelled inside her head. But her raised mood was all too short-lived, and all hope suddenly evaporated. All she found in that single cupboard were various items of half-used thrift store makeup, a softwood hairbrush matted with long blonde hairs, black polyester lingerie, sheer stockings with elasticated tops, and a pair of matching ridiculously high stiletto shoes, of a type she'd never have chosen to wear. Just like those worn by the sorrowful girls in the black-and-white portraits. That's what she told herself. Just like them. 2. Detective Inspector Gareth Gravel, or Grav as he was known, hung his well-worn tweed jacket on the back of his office chair and stared at the mountain. It was a part of the job he hated, tedious but essential, and he reluctantly acknowledged that, like it or not, there was no option but to get his head down and get on with it. Grav dropped 2 heaped spoonfuls of instant coffee granules into his chipped but treasured Neath Rugby Club mug and added 6 sugar lumps and a generous sprinkle of congealed powdered milk in an unsuccessful attempt to raise his flagging spirits. He swiveled in his chair, reached down behind him, switched on the kettle for the second time that morning, and grinned despite himself. Could life get any better? Yes, it certainly could. A good murder case or an armed robbery, something along those lines, would be a welcome distraction. A case he could really get stuck into, utilizing the various investigative skills he'd developed and honed in over 20 years of West Wales policing. He waited impatiently for the water to come to the boil, filled his mug almost to the brim, and was stirring the resulting concoction vigorously with a tarnished dessert spoon when the shrill tone of his office phone rang out, causing him to swear loudly at the untimely interruption. He lifted the mug to his mouth and sipped the hot liquid, leaving a powdery moustache above his top lip, before picking up the phone and saying, "Hello?" in a hoarse smoker's rattle that was familiar to all in the force. "Hello, sir. It's Sandra on the front desk. I've got an Anne Jones here who says that her daughter's missing." "How old?" "Oh, I'd say she's probably in her mid to late 40s. She could be a little older, I guess. It's hard to tell sometimes, what with the makeup and all." Grav took a large gulp of the fast-cooling liquid and shook his head slowly. "The missing girl, not the mother, Sandra. The missing girl." Oh, of course. It seems so obvious now that you've said it. Give me a second. I'll go and ask her. How old is your daughter, Mrs. Jones? The mother dabbed away her tears with a white cotton hanky taken from her handbag. She's 19. Just 19. She's 19, sir. Oh, for fuck's sake. What the hell are you telling me for? She's 19, not 9. Get someone in uniform to have a word with the woman. I've got more important things to be getting on with. Sandra took a deep breath and steadied herself before responding in hushed tones. It seems the mother's a close friend. They went to some posh boarding school together. Isn't the desk sergeant available? Surely Her Majesty would be satisfied with him. He's not a bad-looking bloke from a distance. The girl's probably staying at some friend's house and sleeping off a hangover. Sandra grinned, amused by his determined resistance. She asked for you by name, sir. It seems you come recommended. Grav pushed back his chair with a forlorn expression on his world-weary face and cursed his painfully arthritic knees as he pushed himself stiffly to his feet with the aid of his desktop. He knew when he was beaten, and at least he could kick the paperwork into touch for half an hour or so. It wasn't all bad. Why not look on the bright side? He tilted his head back and drained his mug before speaking again. Put her in one of the interview rooms and tell her I'll be with her in a couple of minutes. Ask her if she'd like a cup of something. Serve it on a silver tray and don't forget to curtsy. It may win us some brownie points with the brass when she reports back. Sandra laughed, amused as intended, and gratified to end her conversation with a man notorious for his sharp tongue. "Will do, sir." As he pushed open the door and entered interview room 2 with flagging enthusiasm, the experienced DI was met by a tearful, somewhat underweight woman with shoulder-length permed hair, whose immaculate, smart but casual outfit and subtle makeup signalled her membership of the moneyed middle classes. She rose to her feet and reached out to shake the inspector's hand as he approached her. "It's good of you to see me so promptly, Inspector. I'm sure you'll appreciate that I want to get this unfortunate matter satisfactorily resolved as quickly as possible." Grav nodded and smiled warmly, revealing nicotine-stained teeth that were at least his own. "Nice to meet you too, Mrs. Jones. Please call me Grav. There's no need for formalities in these parts. Now, take a seat, try to relax, and tell me all about it. Perhaps we can start with your daughter's name." "It's Emma Jones." Grav took a police-issue pocketbook from the back pocket of his trousers, sat himself down, opened it to the appropriate page, and made a note of the girl's name in black ink, followed by her date of birth, address, and contact telephone number. "So, your daughter's a student at Cardiff University?" "Yes, she's in the second year of a biomedical science BSc. "A bright girl." Mrs. Jones' eye. "Yes, she is. She wants to be a research scientist after qualifying. It's what she's always wanted to do for as long as I can remember. That's the sort of girl she is." "And she's staying in student lodgings?" The mother took a steroid nasal spray from her handbag, looked away, and administered 2 urgent puffs, before steadying herself and nodding her agreement. "Please accept my apologies. I suffer terribly with hay fever at this time of year." "No need to apologize. I get a touch of it myself from time to time. You were telling me about your daughter." She returned the medication to her handbag and fastened the clasp. "She had to move out of the halls of residence after completing the first year of her course. It seems the space is rather limited. She's been in digs ever since. She shares a house with 2 other girls studying the same subject. I haven't met them as yet, but Emma tells me that they're nice enough, and I trust her judgment. She's always been a good judge of character, even as a young girl. I think some people have a talent for such things." The DI looked on sympathetically as her tears began to flow. Are you okay to continue? I can fetch you a glass of water or a hot drink if that helps." Mrs. Jones shook her head frantically and swallowed the excess saliva in her mouth. No, that's extremely kind of you, but I just want to get on with it. The quicker we get this done, the quicker you can make the appropriate inquiries and find my daughter." Grav raised a hand to his face and scratched his veined nose with an uneven fingernail. Why so concerned? Why so anxious? Was there more to this than it seemed on face value? Or was the woman worrying about nothing very much at all, in the way home-alone parents sometimes did? "When did you last see your daughter?" "I haven't actually seen her since she came home for the weekend 2 weeks ago, but I spoke to her on the telephone on Friday evening. She never fails to ring at least once a week. We're a very close family, not at all like some of the miscreants you must have the misfortune to meet in your job. She likes to keep in touch." Grav's impatience was betrayed by his body language as he crossed his arms loosely and glared at her. "Let's see if I've got this right. You spoke to her on Friday night, and today's Monday. She's been missing for 2 days, maximum, and that's if she's missing at all. We're talking about a girl of 19, not a frigging child." Mrs. Jones' expression hardened as she leant forward in her seat and fixed him with a steely glower that left him in no... "I'm very well aware of that, Inspector. But I think you'll find that the circumstances are exceptional. I wouldn't be here otherwise. I don't make a habit of wasting other people's time, or my own, for that matter." Grav nodded, unfolded his arms, and reopened his pocketbook. Perhaps there was more to it. "Okay, I'm listening." "My daughter's tutor contacted me at my home first thing this morning to express his concerns regarding her welfare. We've met socially, you understand." No surprises there. The middle-class mafia strikes again. Maybe if he'd played the game, he'd be a DCI by now. "So, what exactly did this tutor have to say for themselves?" Mrs. Jones bit the inside of her lower lip hard before responding. The police officer's tone was bordering on rudeness, just as he'd been described. He'd better have his compensations, as she'd been assured. "Emma missed the deadline for an important essay this morning. Professor Goddard tried to contact her by phone several times as the morning progressed, but he didn't get a response. It's just not like her, you see. She's an extremely hard-working girl. She couldn't be more committed to her future profession. There is no way she'd jeopardize her future by not handing in an essay, unless it were utterly unavoidable. She'd have rung me if there was a problem. Something has happened to her. I just know it has." Grav silently admonished himself for his earlier impatience. He shouldn't be too quick to judge. Maybe the once beautiful woman with her sallow skin and anxious expression had genuine cause to worry. Did the professor say anything more? Anything at all? He'd already spoken to her 2 housemates, who said they last saw her on Friday at about 7-ish. That's an hour or so after she'd spoken to me. They tried to talk her into a night out on the town, but she insisted on staying in to continue her work. She mentioned the essay. Neither of them have seen her since, although one of them said she thought she heard someone leaving the house in the early hours of Saturday morning, before turning over and going back to sleep. Grav stifled a yawn and began making brief scribbled notes in his barely decipherable handwriting. "Who else was in the house at the time?" "Just the 3 girls, from what I'm told." "Neither of Emma's friends brought anyone back from their night out? It wouldn't be surprising if they had. A boyfriend, perhaps?" She shook her head. "According to Professor Goddard, yes, I did. The professor was perfectly clear on the matter." Grav ran a hand through his sparse, greying hair and leant forwards in his seat. Perhaps she should have been a detective. She'd missed her calling. Does Emma have a boyfriend? She looked at him and frowned. There was a young man named Peter Moseley for a few months. I met him briefly when visiting Emma in Cardiff at the end of last term. He's a rather diffident and unimpressive individual in his late 20s who works in the university library in some capacity or other. I thought he was too immature for her. I told her she could do better. He wasn't the man for her. I knew that as soon as I met him. And she listened to you? Jones nodded once and smiled, but her smile left her face as quickly as it appeared. Yes, she did. They're no longer an item. Jones shook her head and shifted uneasily in her seat. She finally ended the relationship a few weeks ago to focus on her studies. It was the right decision for her. But he didn't take it well, apparently. Really? Can you expand on that for me? Emma said that he pleaded with her at first. Please don't leave me. I can't face life without you. I'll change. I promise I'll change. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. That sort of thing. But when she repeatedly reiterated her intentions, he became threatening. Grav raised his bloodshot eyes from his notes as the tale took an all-too-familiar turn. Are you telling me he became physically violent towards her? Jones looked unexpectedly shocked at the suggestion. Oh, no, nothing at all like that. I don't believe he's that type of man, if man's the word for them. She'd have told me if he had, I'm sure of that. The threats were directed towards himself rather than her. I can't face the future without you at my side. I'll kill myself if you don't change your mind, and it will be all your fault when I do. You know the sort of nonsense such weak-willed people come up with when faced with rejection. It's rather sad in a pathetic way, wouldn't you agree? The DI nodded his silent acknowledgement. He'd heard it all before, more times than he cared to remember. The threats never came to anything. No, he pestered her repeatedly for a week or so, as you'd expect he would. But it seems he finally accepted that it was over. I told her to stick to her guns, whatever he said, and that's exactly what she did. Good on her, that's what I say. She's a Okay, so it seems he hadn't been violent. Time to take a different tack. Did Emma seem in any way stressed when you last spoke to her? Breakups are never easy. Jones visibly stiffened, the contours of her face changing as her facial muscles tightened. What on earth are you trying to imply? Just keep asking your questions, Grav. Just do your job. She's split up with this Moseley character. He didn't make it easy for her, and she's studying a particularly demanding subject. Science courses aren't exactly easy. It wouldn't be surprising if she was feeling the pressure. Jones suddenly slapped the palm of her right hand down hard on the desktop and made him jump. No! Don't even think of going down that road. She's a happy girl with an IQ in the top 2% of the population who thrives in the academic world. She's over Moseley and his antics and was very well prepared for and confident of passing her essay with flying colours, as she has all the others, by the way. Grav's brow furrowed. She wasn't going to like his next question one bit. And you're certain that nothing's changed. Even the brightest students can sometimes wilt under the pressure. Sometimes when it seems totally out of character. It wouldn't reflect badly on her if she had. Am I not speaking English, Inspector? Do I need to explain myself in simpler terms you can understand? Or maybe I'm speaking too quietly for your aging Welsh ears. Grav gripped his chin and nodded. Bloody charming. Okay, I had to ask. Have you got a recent photo of Emma? It's always useful in this type of case. Jones opened her handbag with quivering fingers, took out a 6x4-inch colour photograph of Emma smiling sweetly, and handed it to the DI with an outstretched hand. "Emma is not a case, Inspector. She's my daughter. I'd be glad if you'd remember that." "Sorry, force of habit. I didn't mean anything by it. Now, is there anything else you want to say or ask before we bring the interview to a close?" She stirred as if to leave, but remained facing him without walking away. "Just one thing, Inspector. Find my daughter, and find her quickly." 3. The man stared at the screen with unblinking eyes, intensely focusing on the sleeping figure of the girl for a minute or two, before finally looking away and rearranging his handwritten notes. Day and night meant nothing to her. There was only the room. There was only his voice. He was the center of her world, and she should be grateful for that. She was alive and had everything she required. He would meet her every need for as long as he deemed it appropriate. He was her God, the reason for her existence, the arbiter of life and death. What more could she possibly want in this life? She was wanted for the moment, and that was more than many could claim. Now all she had to do was satisfy his requirements to an acceptable level and survive. He shuffled through his papers again and leant back in his chair with his slender fingers linked in front of him, as if in prayer. But was she the one? Had he finally found her after all this time? His soulmate, the girl with whom he was destined to spend eternity? She could be. It was looking hopeful. She had the right look, the right taste, the right smell. But would she meet his exacting standards? Would she share his interests, or would she let him down and judge him like all the others? The girls who promised much but ultimately disappointed before death. She'd better not, for her sake. She could prove no less disposable than the rest of them. He took an Irish whiskey bottle from the shelf secured to the wall above his head, poured himself an overly generous tot, lifted the glass to his lips, and grimaced as the undiluted spirit burned his throat. So why her? Why this particular girl when there were so many to choose from? It wasn't an easy question to answer. He'd never targeted a local girl before. That was a first, and maybe he'd gambled with his freedom. It was a relatively small pond within which to hunt, and that increased the risks. He had to accept that. And he'd never chosen a girl with close family ties in the past either. He'd ruled out otherwise suitable targets more than once over the years on exactly those grounds. The drug addicts, the sex workers, and the homeless who wandered the streets of the northern industrial cities like Manchester, Bolton, and Halifax were a much safer option. There was no denying that. Perhaps he should have stuck to them, and so why hadn't he? That was the crucial question. He sipped the whiskey and cast his eyes over the girl's sleeping form. Because this girl was special. That was why. That explained his deviation from the norm. He'd known it the second he first set eyes on her, the second he spoke to her for the first glorious, wonderful time. She was special. That was it. What other explanation was there? The risks were worth it. It really was as simple as that. He tilted his head back and drained the glass with a smirk on his face, poured himself a second measure to celebrate his insight, and continued dissecting his past actions with a scientific fervor. Yes, he'd deviated from his tried-and-tested modus operandi for the first time, but with very good reason. That was the essential caveat. And he'd planned the abduction well enough. That was justification in itself. The thrill of the chase had been utterly exhilarating. It always was when the prey was particularly desirable. He'd been meticulous in his planning. He'd considered all the angles and utilized the knowledge and skills he'd developed over the years to achieve his ultimate goal. That was why he did it. The risks were acceptable, and there was nothing wrong with that. He crossed and uncrossed his legs before leaning back in his seat with his hands linked behind his nape. It hadn't been easy, of course. He had to be patient and bide his time until the circumstances were precisely right. He'd watched her for weeks. He'd established her patterns of behavior and looked for suitable opportunities until he identified the optimum time and place to take her and introduce her to his secret world. And, difficult or not, he'd succeeded in his quest. That was worthy of congratulation. It was a triumph of superior intellect over adversity, and hurrah to that. He massaged the back of his neck and smiled contentedly. The long grey wig and false beard helped maintain his anonymity, as did the dishevelled charity shop clothing, the walking cane and feigned stooped appearance. No one was ever going to recognize him in that lot. He'd become a reasonably good character actor over the years, and an old man was an inspired choice. The elderly were largely invisible to others. Even his know-it-all bitch mother wouldn't have recognized him had she. The man's attention returned to the screen in front of him as the past faded, and he took full advantage of the night vision lens, revealing the girl's every movement. She was still asleep, lying there in sartorial comfort and almost certainly dreaming of him. It would take a bit of time for her to adapt to her new surroundings completely, of course. It always did. But it would be well worth the effort. She was wearing the lingerie as instructed. That was to her credit. And didn't she look good enough to eat? The garments accentuated her beauty and made her all the more erotic. She was tottering unconvincingly on the stilettos when moving around the room. That was regrettable, but she'd get used to them given time. She just needed a bit of practice. He'd have to be patient for as long as possible. Her recent refusal to eat was a cause for concern, but she wasn't the first. She'd already lost a pound or two. Her ribs were more visible than before, her cheeks sunken, but she was occasionally drinking from the bathroom tap when she thought he wasn't watching. She'd survive for another week or two on water alone, if he chose to allow her that luxury. He broke into a toothy smile and laughed humorlessly. What did it matter, anyway? Watching her slowly starve would be amusing and informative. Yes, observing her physical and psychological disintegration could prove a fascinating process which he could relive time and time again on film at his convenience. Or, alternatively, he could force-feed her, if so inclined. That was always an option worth considering. Why not give her a few days to consider her situation and potentially start eating again? That seemed entirely reasonable in the circumstances. He'd always been a generous man. If she ate, she may be the one, and if she wasn't, she'd give up on life. What was wrong with that? He pushed up the sleeve of his woolen jumper and checked the time. He'd have to leave for work by 8 at the latest, however fast he drove. That only gave him about 20 minutes before he had to hit the road. Not nearly enough time to fully indulge his inclinations as he'd like, but he really mustn't be late again. Drawing further attention to himself was ill-advised at best, and should be avoided if at all possible, even